This is about jhana then. Specifically, this is the word in early Buddhist texts which refer to four types of absorption, four particular types of absorption. The term doesn't refer to any of the other types. Of course, there are lots of meditations in the early Buddhist literature. In the Pali Canon, jhana is really specifically about four types of meditation. Right, so just starting where we were last week, talking about the Atthakavagga and the Parayanavagga. So in the last week we were looking at the Atthakavagga and a lot of practices which could be described as bare or simple cognition. And there's more of the same in the Parayanavagga. This is the section of the Sutta Nipata on going to the far shore.
Yeah, choose one day.
Okay. I'm going to speak 4 hours. Yeah. So, starting then with the Parayanavagga. The Parayanavagga, as well as the Atthakavagga, are spoken of in the Pali Canon as if they were already closed in the early period. They're said to be texts to be recited even while the Buddha is still alive. I've just got here the supplementary verses which close the Parayana, uttered by the old Brahmana Pingya. Pingya says, I will recite the Parayana. As he saw it, this is the Buddha now, he is the Buddha, as he saw it, so he explained it, the spotless one who abounds in wisdom. Without sensual pleasure, free from thirst, why would the Naga speak falsely? Pingya then goes on to indicate that he is reciting the Parayana and praising the Buddha even while the Buddha is still alive. So these are the words at the end of the text that Pingya, sort of devotional words really. I see him in my mind as if with my eyes, day and night, Brahmana, being diligent, I spend the night honouring him. Therefore I think there is no separation from him. My faith, joy, mind, and mindfulness do not deviate from Gautama's dispensation. Wherever the one abounding in wisdom goes, I bow down in that direction. This is sort of a remarkable personal testament. And there's nothing really like this in the Pali Canon. The Parayana is said to be closed in the Buddha's lifetime. Nothing that has that standing in the Pali Canon, and nothing is described like this. Pingya is claiming to be the reciter of the text. So we can ask, was there really an old Brahmana called Pingya who received instruction from the Buddha and remembered it as the Parayanavagga? I think a simple literary analysis suggests we should take the notion seriously. The Parayana weaves a peculiar course, its ideas being repeated and reformulated, occasionally taken in new directions, but always dependent on what is preceded. Reading the whole text is like flowing in a stream, as it gently rolls through a valley, turning this way and that, in and out of nooks and crannies, occasionally disappearing into the woods, but always re-emerging and following the same direction. The text can best be read as the record of an occasion when the Buddha was questioned by a group of seekers. Its discussions make sense as a gradual flow of ideas, shared between master and pupil. Two aspects in particular of the text suggest this reading. So first I want to talk about the use of stream imagery in the text. Followed by that, I'll be looking at the teachings on mindfulness. So the Parayanavagga literally is the text, the book on going to the far shore. And stream imagery is used from the outset. Here we have a section from the first dialogue. The Brahmin Ajita asks the Buddha about the streams of suffering. So this is what Ajita says, right in the first dialogue of the Parayana. Streams flow everywhere. What holds them back? Proclaim the restraint of streams. By what might streams be blocked? To this, the Buddha gives a simple and understated answer. The streams which are found in the world, mindfulness holds them back. I will proclaim the restraint of streams. By understanding, they might be blocked. This opening sets the agenda for the entire series of dialogues that begin. Stream imagery dominates, and the focus of almost all the teachings is mindfulness. In the fourth dialogue, the Brahmana Metagu introduces a new aspect in the imagery. He talks about the flood of suffering. So Metagu asks the Buddha, how do the wise cross over the flood? And this is the Buddha's teaching. Whatever you discern, above, below, or all around in the middle, warding off delight and attachment to these, let not your consciousness linger in being. Living thus, mindful and diligent, the wandering bhikkhu, abandoning things made mine. Birth, decrepitude, sorrow, and lamentation. The wise one right here might abandon suffering. So the Buddha is asked about the flood of suffering, and he offers in response a teaching on bare cognition. In the very next dialogue, the Buddha offers a variation on the teaching to Metagu. So this is in response to questions by Dotaka. I will proclaim that peace to you, which is without hearsay in witness phenomena, knowing which the one who practices mindfully might cross over attachment to the world. Whatever you discern above, below, or all around in the middle, understanding this as attachment to the world, do not form desire for being or non-being. So we have the same motif, the same idea of whatever you discern, have a particular enlightened attitude to that. The overriding metaphor of crossing over the flood is thus used to frame bare cognition teachings. The focus of these teachings is extremely simple. The Buddha's message is just to be mindful, avoid pleasures, and have no desire. As the Buddha tells Hemaka, the warding away of desire and passion, with regard to what is seen, heard, thought, or cognized, is nirvana. This spiritual simplicity is challenging. We might expect the path to require more. Surely there is more to say about the liberated state and how to get there. Such concerns seem to motivate the query of the Brahmana Todeya in the ninth dialogue. So the Buddha is continually giving teachings saying, don't have desire, don't have passion, avoid pleasure, and be mindful. So then finally the Brahmin Todeya says this to the Buddha. He asks this, in whom sensual pleasure do not abide, for whom thirst is not found, the one who has crossed over doubt, what is his liberation like? Todeya is asking about what liberation is like for the one who follows the Buddha's advice and lives without pleasure and desire. The Buddha's response is very simple. In whom sensual pleasures do not abide, for whom thirst is not found, the one who has crossed over doubt, his liberation is not otherwise. So that is the profound wisdom of the Buddha. To the question, what is it like to be liberated if one lives without pleasure and desire? The Buddha says, it is precisely being without pleasure and desire that is liberation. There is nothing more to add. Todeya wants to know something more. Probably something metaphysical about the state of liberation. He is a Brahmana, after all. But the Buddha refuses to say anything more. What is liberation like for the one who has no desire? It is just like having no desire. To practice bare cognition, to be aware of things without constructing or desiring, is thus the simple task to be achieved. But profound simplicity is a challenge. Most people require a more elaborate bridge than this to travel to the far shore of suffering. In particular, the bridge or raft expected by seekers of the Buddha's time was one of meditative concentration, absorption. But both the Attika and Parayana Vaggas hardly mention this. They don't talk about samadhi. So in the Tuvataka Sutta of the Attika Vagga, we have a question put to the Buddha here, verse 927. The one with open vision, and I witnessed, has explained the Dhamma which wards off danger. That's a statement. Now the question, proclaim the conduct, or rather a request. Proclaim the conduct, good sir, the precepts and absorption. Somebody is coming to the Buddha here and specifically asking about absorption, samadhi. Now the Buddha, in response to this, doesn't say much about samadhi at all. The Buddha's response to this, he does refer to meditators, jhāyi, but he doesn't say what they're meditating on. Absorption might be on the agenda, but we are not told much about it. In the Parayana Vagga, we find out that the Brahmanas who consulted the Buddha were all meditators who delight in meditation. So you can see in the verse 1015, in the introduction to the Parayana, we have the account of the Brahmanas coming from the south, the Deccan, and they are said to be, all of the Brahmanas had their own following, famed throughout the whole world, meditators who delight in meditation, wise, perfumed by their past impressions. A slightly strange Pali statement. But anyway, they are meditators. We know that they are meditators. They are meditators coming to see the Buddha, who is called a meditator by Udaya, the Brahmana Udaya. The Brahmana Udaya says this to the Buddha, to the meditator seated free from defilement, who has done what had to be done and is without defilement, who has gone to the far shore of all phenomena, seeking, I have come with a question. So a group of seekers described as meditators come to see the Buddha, also described as a meditator. But the Buddha does not teach any meditative practice. He merely tells the Brahmanas to be mindful and live without desire. So we might suspect that the inquiring Brahmanas wanted something more. They wanted a method. Exactly this problem is reflected in the question of, I think it is the seventh dialogue, the sixth or the seventh. The question put by the Brahmana Upasiva. Upasiva says this in his first thing he says to the Buddha. Alone, Sakka, and without support, I am unable to cross over the great flood. Tell me the support, all-seeing one, dependent on which I might cross over this flood. Upasiva's question makes sense in the context of the text, of the Parayana. He does not understand why the Buddha does not teach objects of meditation. But in response to this direct request, the Buddha seems to be more forthcoming. The Buddha said, observing nothingness, mindful, dependent on the idea, it is not. You might cross over the flood. Abandoning sensual pleasure, abstaining from conversation, observe the destruction of thirst night and day. We have a little bit more here. The term nothingness seems to refer to a pre-Buddhist object of meditation, that which was the goal in the system of Alara Kalama. Since the Buddha mentions this object to a Brahmana, it makes sense to suppose this form of meditation was known to Brahmins. But is the Buddha using the term nothingness to denote an object of concentration? The term could be read, the Buddha's answer could be read as some sort of adaptation of existing terminology to the Buddha's ideas about mindfulness. All of the features of the Buddha's teaching in the Parayana are present here. The Buddha is speaking about a lifestyle avoiding pleasure, avoiding thirst, and being mindful. So we don't know if the Buddha's talking about an actual concentrative practice. There is no word meaning concentrate, and the Pali verb used, pekati, does not get used usually for meditative texts. The verb I've translated as observing literally means observing. It means to look, and it isn't found in meditation texts. It's not usual. So the Buddha might not be talking, he might be using an idea to frame his own ideas, an idea known to the Brahmins. The Buddha is then adapting it to his own system. Anyway, it's a little bit unclear. We can't tell exactly what is happening, except we think the Buddha is referring to a Brahminic term. More problematic from the conceptual point of view is how can you be mindful and concentrate on nothingness at the same time? This doesn't seem to make sense. How can you be focused on an object of inner absorption as well as be attentive to multiple objects, both internal and external? So that is the term mindfulness has that connotation. It means to be aware of things inside and out, inner and external reality. Observing nothingness, if it means concentrate on this Brahminic meditation, seems to preclude that. The ideas do not seem to fit. So it's not surprising that the next response to this from Upasiva. Upasiva is skeptical that this can be done. So Upasiva's response is basically saying, is it really possible to stay in a highly absorbed state at the same time as being mindful? Which is easy to understand if being mindful means being aware of objects which might distract you from your absorption. So the final part of these verses, released in the highest release of perception, would he remain there without following other states? That's what Upasiva wants to know. Is it possible to be released in a highly absorbed meditative state without falling away from it, if you're mindful? The Buddha's answer is yes. Released in the highest release of perception, he would remain there without following other objects. The Buddha is at least telling us that you can be absorbed and mindful at the same time. This is what the gist of it seems to be, although we don't know how that can be achieved yet. So we have to try and understand what looks like a highly, apparently contradictory state of affairs. How could the Buddha seemingly value absorption without offering a actual meditative concentrated practice? And how can that be allied with mindfulness? Let's look at a few more clues in the Parayana Vagga. The Buddha's dialogue with Uddaya goes as follows. Purified by equanimity and mindfulness, preceded by reflecting on the Dhamma, I declare the release through understanding, the destruction of ignorance. What we have here is that liberation is said to require reflection first, followed next by mindfulness and equanimity. In the context of the Parayana, equanimity and mindfulness mean bare cognition. So the point that reflection comes first perhaps indicates that we're talking about equanimity and mindfulness that is non-conceptual. We don't really know, but it's possible. The next teaching, I think, the next verse from the Atthaka Vagga, the Buddha's teaching to Sariputta, is a bit more informative. Sariputta, the last chapter of the Atthaka Vagga, asks a general question about what sort of conduct you should follow. What does the path mean in terms of your practice? And the Buddha is very forthcoming in that. A key verse where he mentions absorption is verse 978. With eyes downcast and not foot loose, committed to Jhāna, he should be ever wakeful. Absorbed within, supported by equanimity, he should eradicate worry, which depends on thought. Again, these verses are a little bit elusive. We again have a slightly negative attitude towards thought, towards conceptuality. And we are definitely talking about absorption. And a particular type of absorption. The Pali really is quite clear. An absorption which refers or depends on equanimity. How can that be? So we ask ourselves, is it the case the Buddha doesn't teach a concentrative practice in the Attaka and Parayana Vaggas because mindfulness is the method? Is bare cognition the way to absorption, non-conceptuality, and liberation? Let us look at some other statements on this, starting with the Sāmaññapala Sutta, the primary source of the Buddhist path in early Buddhist literature. The basic path structure I put at the top, of course, it's a very long text, but it can be simplified to, there is virtue at the beginning, sila. This is followed by sense restraint, followed by mindfulness and wakefulness. At this stage, the bhikkhu can withdraw to seclusion. He sits down cross-legged. It looks like a description of meditative practice now. What happens next, though, is that no object of meditation is given. The bhikkhu abandons the 5 hindrances and then attains the 4 jhanas. That's what it says. That these are the descriptions of what goes into attaining jhana. We only have 2 actual spiritual disciplines, sense restraint and mindfulness, wakefulness. Both are quite obviously exercises in simplifying cognition. So sense restraint. These are usually taken as if they're preparatory spiritual disciplines, but in fact they are the only disciplines, according to this text. The bhikkhu, seeing a form with the eye, does not grasp at its general appearance or features. He conducts himself for the restraint of that from which greed and unhappiness, bad, unskillful phenomena would overwhelm him, were he to be living without restraining the faculty of vision. He protects his faculty of vision. Endowed with this noble restraint of the faculties, he experiences pure happiness within. The discipline of simple cognition, described as mindfulness or wakefulness, is a sort of intensification of that. The bhikkhu is fully attentive when going forward or back, when looking forward or backwards, when bending or stretching, when holding his outer robe, bowl, and inner robe, when eating, drinking, chewing, or tasting, when defecating or urinating, when going, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, speaking, or being quiet. So we have 2 spiritual disciplines. They are usually taken as preparatory, things that prepare the way for jhana. What if they are the actual practices which cause jhana? Why not read the text like that? Anyway, from what we have looked at in the previous weeks, these disciplines are quite like the teaching that was given to Mālankaputta. The Buddha said to Mālankaputta, with regard to what is seen, heard, or thought, or cognized, let there just be what is cognized. This is sort of going in that direction. And according to the Sāmaññapala Sutta, the natural outcome of these disciplines is absorption, the 4 jhanas. What precedes jhana and allows for it to emerge is a disciplined lifestyle in which simplified cognition features heavily. Perhaps this is the answer to Upasiva's conundrum. So I just want to suggest this as an idea now. I'm going to argue for this idea. There are no objects of meditation in early Buddhism that produce the jhanas. There are some things which the later tradition believes are objects called kasinas. The word kasina in Pali doesn't mean a meditation object. It's an abstract noun meaning a totality. So for any meditations in early Buddhism, there are no objects. I'm going to read the texts as they're given to us and take it that these are the disciplines that produce jhana. But let us look at a different point of view. So just before looking at this point of view, I stress the point, the 4 jhanas are never said to be produced by concentrating on an object in the Pali Canon, as far as I'm aware. This is definitely the case about meditation in the Atthakavagga and Parayana too. Should we accept the text at their word or interpret otherwise? So here is a learned interpretation by Analayo, gives a different explanation to me. He says, the main difference between the 4 absorptions and the 4 immaterial spheres is related to their respective objects. The 4 absorptions can be cultivated with a variety of objects, hence no specific object is mentioned when these are described. The immaterial spheres involving a transcendence of whatever object has been used for attaining the 4th absorption, consequently the descriptions refer to such transcendence. So the 4 absorptions can be cultivated with a variety of objects. That's the standard Theravadan view. I'm sure that's the standard Indian Buddhist view as well. Is there any textual evidence for it? I don't think so. This is a very strong statement, and there's no evidence for it. I think that's a bit problematic. Let us now look at another opinion, another learned opinion from Rupert Gethin. Rupert Gethin offers an argument, but even this expresses a bias in favour of settled tradition. Just what the would-be meditator has to do to get from sitting down cross-legged to the jhanas and beyond is not at all clear. To put it another way, if one sets off to the forest with only a copy of the Samanyapala Sutta as one's guide, it is doubtful that one would make very much progress in one's meditation. On the other hand, perhaps before we judge the Samanyapala Sutta, we should take it seriously and maybe even try what it advises. Gethin here assumes that meditative cultivation requires concentration. This is an assumption. So he claims that the texts aren't being straight with us. This is a rather long quote. I'm quoting this, I think this is sort of the general position, I would say. Why are there no meditative objects given for the attainment of jhana? Here is the standard position. The relative absence of specific instruction in the earlier texts perhaps should be understood in the light of something that is clear in the later texts, namely, a view that the effective practice of meditation requires the personal instruction of a teacher. Thus, the reason why the earlier texts fail to reveal very much about just how to practice meditation is not because they are uninterested in such matters or think they are unimportant, but rather precisely the opposite. They are too important to write down, to be imparted in this way, i.e. textually. This is, after all, a typical ancient Indian attitude to learning. It should be imparted orally, directly from teacher to pupil. Thus, we should understand the earliest texts as indicating the general framework and outlining basic practices, basic guidelines for the practice of meditation. But the specific details of technique and the actual procedures are matters for the teacher and his pupils. It is only later that some of these get committed to writing, and even then, still in somewhat general terms. Strictly as historians of religion, we must conclude that the earliest techniques of Buddhist meditation are lost to us. Perhaps, though, as historians of religion, before concluding that techniques of meditation were not written down and so lost, we should first question our own assumptions about what meditation is. Not to do this, Instead, to imagine Buddhist meditation squarely within the line set down by tradition is a form of exegesis. Perhaps we should instead read the early Buddhist accounts as they are, take seriously what they actually say, without filling in perceived gaps. In doing this, we might come to understand that the 4 jhanas maybe require no concentrative practices at all. Perhaps, according to the Buddha, they occur as a natural process, dependent on a disciplined lifestyle, a specific type of disciplined lifestyle. Right, now I just want to mention this publication, which nobody in Buddhist studies seems to be aware of, by a Polish scholar, Grzegorz Polak. He makes the argument very well that the jhanas don't have objects in the Pali Canon intentionally. There's no lack. It's a very well-made argument. I recommend this book highly. It's something that is obvious. You're learning Pali. You read the Samanyapala Sutta, and you think, okay, the bhikkhu has become absorbed and becomes enlightened. But where are the meditation objects? Sometimes the simple thing to be pointed out is very difficult. You can't see it. This book does see it. It's important for that. Right, what about the jhanas then? The lack of objects. And I've said that maybe the jhanas are something which, the spiritual states which develop naturally, dependent on a certain lifestyle. There is textual support for this. There are a couple of old formulas about the Buddha's awakening and the awakening of a bhikkhu. So first of all, from the Majjhima Nikaya, especially the Bhayabhairava Sutta, The text immediately before the jhanas, the Buddha says this: "Vigor was aroused within me, Brahmana, unsluggish. Mindfulness was established unconfused. My body was tranquil and not excited. My mind was absorbed and one-pointed." This formula occurs after the Bodhisattva had been attending to his thoughts mindfully. In the Bhayabhairava Sutta, the Bodhisattva decides not to change his activity, whether he is walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, until any arisen fear had been dissipated. Mindfulness apparently leads to the natural changes in bodily and mental states that produce the jhanas. A similar formula is applied to the bhikkhu in the Samanyapala Sutta, immediately before the jhanas. A very important formula. For that bhikkhu, observing the abandoning of the 5 hindrances within, gladness arises. Being glad, joy arises. Joyful in mind, his body becomes tranquil. With his body tranquil, he experiences bliss. Experiencing bliss, his mind becomes absorbed. I haven't given the Pali here, but in these accounts, especially important are the use of passive terms, denoting becoming absorbed or concentrated. There are no active words saying concentrate. Becoming concentrated, samadhiyati, or samahita, the past participle. The Buddha or a bhikkhu does not concentrate the mind, but the mind becomes absorbed, somehow through a natural process. Right, now there's one other text, really important text, on the natural attainment of the jhanas, which is very famous, extremely important, and this is the Buddha's own recollection as a child. I'm giving the version of the text that occurs in the Mahasacchaka Sutta, but it occurs also in a few other texts. This is the key moment in these texts in which we get this statement. This is the moment where the Buddha thinks to himself, I'm not getting anywhere. There is a problem. Why am I not getting anywhere? So the Buddha says to the Brahmin, Agivesana. This is the Buddha's reasoning after his ascetic practices. Whatever ascetics and brahmanas in the past, or in the future, or at present, experience racking, painful, sharp, harsh, severe sensations. It is only to this limit, not more than this. But through these severe, difficult practices, I did not attain a distinction in knowing and seeing, suitable for the noble, beyond human phenomena. Perhaps there is another way to awakening. This occurred to me then, Agivesana. The Buddha's quoting himself. But I recall, in the cool shade of a jambu tree, while my father the Saka was working, sitting down, separated from sensual pleasures and unskillful states, passing my time having attained the first jhana, a state of joy and bliss born from seclusion, endowed with reasoning and reflection. Perhaps this is the way to awakening. Why don't we try and take this statement seriously? Let us ask, when the Bodhisattva attained the first jhana, did he sit down cross-legged, close his eyes, and focus his mind within, on an object of samadhi? I don't think so. Nothing like that is described anyway. The account implies, if not states outright, that he remembers falling into the state naturally, through no particular effort. Now, of course, this might just be a hagiography. This might just be an argument against Jains and other ascetic groups. But it is of a piece with the other short texts on attaining the jhanas naturally. It's with a piece with what is said in the Samanyapala Sutta. It's also in agreement with the Atthakavagga and Parayana-vaggas. All of these texts can be read as they are from a particular point of view, giving a particular point of view. Let's now look at the jhanas themselves. So in the Samanyapala Sutta, the preparatory disciplines prior to jhana focus on simple cognition. They occasionally add this or that other practice, but generally it's about simple cognition. Attending to bodily positions and activities. Bodily tranquility is also an important part of the formula, indicating the natural occurrence of jhana. So the body in these accounts of attaining jhana is an important part of the practice. So it's no surprise to find that the four jhanas describe a psychosomatic transformation. So this is the well-known text of the jhana. I just point your attention to these are the section which reads, he floods, inundates, fills and pervades this very body with joy and bliss born from seclusion. There is no part of his body unpervaded by that joy and bliss. They don't occur in every occurrence of the jhanas, but Samanyapala Sutta, the Digha Nikaya, and a few other key texts, they do. I don't think, anyway, the jhanas can be read without these texts. And we see the simile is a skilled bathman making a ball of soap leather. A ball of soap that doesn't drip, is perfectly viscous. So this is a very physical experience. The ball of soap indicates this. Of course, you could say that if you concentrate on a mental object, that it might produce bodily effects. Of course, that can happen. Naturally, that will happen. But this is a bit more than that. The whole point of the meditation is the suffusion of the body with this bliss. The next jhana is an intensification of this. Okay, so the second jhana, of course, the main thing that is happening here is that normal thought is ceasing. Reasoning and reflection stops. With the calming of reasoning and reflection, the bhikkhu abides having attained the second jhana, etc. He floods, inundates, fills, and pervades this very body with the joy and bliss born from absorption. Okay, now a more intense simile. Just as a deep pool in which water wells up, without an inlet to the east, south, west, or north, without rain pouring down on it from time to time, but with cool currents of water rising up from it, which would flood, inundate, fill, and pervade it with cool water, so that there would be no part of the pool unpervaded by cool water. Thus the bhikkhu floods this very body with joy and bliss born from absorption. So the bhikkhu's body is suffused with a more intense type of joy and bliss, one which is now likened to a cool spring. So the bhikkhu's bodily experience, it is like the spring, the cool spring. Previously in the first jhana, it had been like merely a ball of soap that doesn't drip. So the samadhi experience is a gain of the body as a whole. Okay? The bhikkhu is not merely without reasoning and reflection. The bhikkhu is feeling, experiencing the body as a whole. The third jhana gives us a few more things to think about. So we have, first of all, with the fading of joy, the bhikkhu abides equanimously, mindful and fully aware, and experiences bliss with his body. He abides having attained the third jhana, about which the noble ones say, equanimous, mindful, abiding in bliss. The new dimensions, the new things added here are the words, the terms for some sort of mindful state. They hadn't appeared in the previous jhanas. And we have a new simile. We don't just have a simile of a ball of soap or a pool, we have something within the cool pool. So we, just as in a pond of blue, red or white lotuses, some lotuses born in water, etc., are flooded, inundated, filled and pervaded by cool water from root to tip, so that no part of those lotuses would not be flooded, inundated, etc. Thus the bhikkhu floods this very body with bliss, devoid of joy. I think we need to pay attention to these similes. They don't really attract scholarly attention. But let us compare this to what has happened previously. Prior to this, the bhikkhu's embodied experience has been likened to a moist ball of lava that doesn't drip, and also to a natural spring with cool water welling up from below. We now have a new item, the image of a lotus immersed in water. Of course, the lotus is a potent symbol of personal transformation. Apart from the notion of a non-differentiated watery suffusion, we now have the image of something alive within that suffusion. This new item parallels a new element in the jhana description, which is equanimity and mindfulness, terms which exactly indicate being alive and alert to things. I suggest that the lotus indicates the bhikkhu's transformed state of mindfulness. Not only is he absorbed, suffused in water, as in the second jhana, he is also mindfully aware. Now in the fourth jhana, we are at the pinnacle. In the Samanyapala Sutta, this is the state just before the liberating insight. So we can see from the basic description how close the bhikkhu is to liberation. It begins with the abandoning of bliss and suffering, the fading away of all past states of happiness and unhappiness. The bhikkhu abides having attained the fourth jhana, the complete purification of equanimity and mindfulness, devoid of pleasure and pain. It's still a state in which there can be pervaded and suffused throughout the body. The simile indicates this more clearly, that it's a purified state of bodily suffusion. Just as a man would be seated covering himself with a white cloth, including his head, so that no part of the body would not be touched by the cloth, even so the bhikkhu remains seated, having pervaded this very body with a purified, cleansed mind. The simile imagines a person enveloped from head to foot, not by cool water, but by a white cloth. This somehow must stand for the state of purified equanimity, which the jhana description mentions. Perhaps we have a description of the state which Upasiva in the Parayana found so difficult to understand. A state of absorption in which the person is mindfully aware. Absorption and mindfulness hand in hand. This idea is less difficult to understand when the absorption is understood in bodily terms, as a samadhi of complete bodily suffusion. With his sentience distributed throughout his entire body, the bhikkhu is in a state of experiential potential. It is from this basis, through mindfulness, that liberation can be achieved. So these jhanas with their focus on body, the experience of the unified body, is not a description of states, it's not a description of concentrating on an object. It's a total experience of your being. Now, I want to consider then whether this understanding of jhana, that is, start with this understanding of jhana. Let's see if it makes any sense of the four applications of mindfulness. I argued last week that the Satipatthanas are a creation of the period around the Second Buddhist Council. I also suggested, this is not a new argument, that the core of the fourth Satipatthana, being the 7 factors of awakening, suggests a jhanic orientation. So let's take that seriously. What if the Satipatthanas are really about jhana? So I just start by looking at the second Satipatthana, which is the mindfulness of sensation. This is from Jeff Kwan's book on mindfulness, very useful book, Mindfulness in Early Buddhism. A comparison of the Pali text with the 2 Chinese versions. The core of the second Satipatthana, I don't want to go into text critical arguments here. Clearly the core of all 3 texts is simply being aware of the simple quality of your sensation, and then something else, whether your sensations are worldly or unworldly, worldly or spiritual. So that is the core of the second Satipatthana. What is my sensation? Pleasure, pain, or neither? And is that sensation a spiritual type of experience? Now, there's something that everybody has missed. I've been looking in all of the scholarship for the Satipatthanas. The distinction between worldly and spiritual, the terms in Pali are amisa and niramisa. They're quite unusual, really. They specifically refer to jhanic type experience, always. They're always about samadhi and always pretty much about jhana. Let me just give one example. Sangyutta 36:11 defines niramisa piti, spiritual joy, in terms of the first 2 jhanas. It describes niramisa sukha, spiritual bliss, as the first, second, and third jhanas. This is very simple, very obvious. You analyze the Pali text, I don't know why anyone hasn't done that, but this distinction in sensation is a point about absorption and jhana. So from this perspective, the core of the second Satipatthana is observe your sensations as they are. Consider whether they indicate a jhanic development. Right, the third Satipatthana. I just thought, have I missed something here? Right, I've missed something, never mind. The third Satipatthana. This has been pointed out by Jeff Kwan in his book on mindfulness. The third Satipatthana, about mind or thought, is identical to one of the supernatural powers you get when you've completed your 4 jhanas and just before you become liberated. You luckily, amazingly, get to read other people's minds. It's the same text for the third Satipatthana, your observation of thoughts. So it's pretty weird as a text which is talking about observing your states of mind. If you were going to describe such a practice in mindfulness, I'm not sure you would put it quite like this. It looks like the third Satipatthana has lifted it, perhaps from the Samanyapala Sutta. All of these states of mind, anyway, in the beginning, is from the Samanyapala Sutta. Why then? If they did lift it, why did they lift it? Because it can easily be read as a meditative observation. The iddhi, the supernatural power you get when you approach Buddhahood, is not just any iddhi, reading mind. It's the ability to see the spiritual, meditative quality of someone else's mind. So all of I don't even have to point out that these terms can easily be read as meditative terms. They are explicitly, the second half of them, meditative terms. You can't really observe your mind. How do you observe through mindfulness that your mind is exalted? That's a specific type of term in Pali, mahagata, which usually is used in a meditative absorption context. So the core of the third Satipatthana looks like it's about meditative absorption. So it's actually fairly easy to read the final three Satipatthanas in a jhanic way. They're about observing your bare sensation and thoughts, but then considering, do these show any spiritual progress in a jhanic sense? So that is the last three Satipatthanas. There is still another piece in the puzzle. What about the first Satipatthana, the observation of body? So here is, again, I'm not going to offer a text-critical reconstruction and say what is the earliest part of the text through a comparative study. I just want to look at what conceptually is important from my perspective. This is how the texts begin. So the text starts with the bhikkhu breathing in and out mindfully. After that, the bhikkhu observes the length of breathing, whether it is long or short. And this type of practice is described through the simile of the turner. Just as a skilled turner or his apprentice, when he makes a long pull, he knows I'm making a long pull. Or when he makes a short pull, he knows I'm making a short pull. Even so, when the bhikkhu breathes in long, he knows I breathe in long. When he breathes in short, he knows I breathe in short. So this is, an Indian turner, the traditional craft. It involves pulling a piece of rope attached to an axle. The rhythm of the pulling of the rope is what is being compared to the mindfulness of breathing. So I think this craftsman simile is quite important. Craftsmen do not concentrate exclusively on a single object. They do their work in a focused manner. They are aware of multiple things happening at the same time, but paying close attention to certain particulars. Okay? Craftsmen, they have to see, if you're a painter, if you're a sculptor, you have to keep in mind the wider framework, as well as focusing on specifics. It's not exclusive form of attention, is what I'm saying. Observing the breath is similar to this. The turner pays close attention to the rhythm of the pulling of the rope that turns the axle. The bhikkhu is paying attention to the rhythm of his breathing. The words used are not concentrative. They're just words of simple observation, knowing. The bhikkhu, therefore, is a craftsman of the spirit, pursuing a discipline of simple cognition, a discipline which the text then says leads to developments which look a bit like jhana. So after the observation of the length of breathing, the text goes on. The bhikkhu trains thinking, I will breathe in experiencing the entire body. He trains thinking, I will breathe out experiencing the entire body. He trains thinking, I will breathe in pacifying volition of the body. I know I've translated that differently. I'll try and explain that. He trains thinking, I will breathe out pacifying volition of the body. What do we have here? We have the idea of experiencing the entire body. It's exactly what the 4 jhana similes describe. It is not really easy to understand the text exactly, but there is a quite easy comparison can be made. The jhanas speak of states in which you suffuse the whole body. The whole body is suffused and experienced. The whole body is shrouded in pure white cloth. It's a state of complete bodily absorption. And this Satipatthana is saying, the practice, maybe to get to such a state, I breathe in experiencing the entire body. Even if there is no connection between jhana and Satipatthana, this must be about absorption. I experience the whole body. So we can take the text as referring to a simple cognition of breathing, not a concentration, just in a simple awareness of breathing, leading to certain jhanic type experiences, samadhi, bodily samadhi. Somehow this leads then to the final state I'm really not sure about. Usually this is translated, the final state, I breathe in or out, pacifying bodily activities. It's an unusual term. The term is sankhara. It's in the singular. It's not a usual word to describe action. It's actually the word that describes the volition behind the action. I know it's interpreted otherwise, but the word in Pali pretty much always refers to volition. Maybe we have a jhanic type account here. Observe your breath like a craftsman. Doing that leads to, or maybe you can direct it towards, a sort of absorption focused on the whole body. Maybe when that happens, your bodily volition, maybe when the breathing becomes automatic, I don't know. But somehow the bodily volition stops. The jhanas and the satipatthanas, there is an abundance of material in the Pali Canon connecting them. What the nature of the connection is not clear. I would put it something like this. The jhanas are an account from start to finish, temporally, of somebody, the career of a bhikkhu. The bhikkhu renounces, the bhikkhu goes through all these steps, it's a temporal account, and he ends up as an arahant. The Satipatthana Sutta is not that. It is giving practices to be done perhaps in a single day. At the end of the text, it then says, if you practice this for 7 years, if you practice this for 1 year, even for 1 week. So the temporal part of the Satipatthana Sutta is at the end. It's saying if you do these, you get there, whereas the Samannapala Sutta is giving that temporal progression. That possibly is the only difference. So we have seen then the 4 jhanas and the 4 satipatthanas, they both imagine simplified forms of cognition, but not concentration. Both, particularly the full account of the path in the Samannapala Sutta, focus on intense embodied states of experience. The body features heavily in them. So I find it a little bit strange, given these explicit and compelling accounts, that modern interpreters have missed this point, and they have tried to minimize especially the bodily focus of the jhanas. So this can be seen, I'll just give you a couple of examples. Analayo's interpretation of the 3rd jhana simile. So this at the top is Analayo's interpretation of the 3rd jhana simile. So the lotus being fully submerged in water conveys a further progression when compared to the water welling up in a spring. Here the image depicts a total immersion in water, yes. This, at the same time, is then a condition of total immersion in happiness, yes. The whole mind is engulfed by the uninterrupted and all-pervading experience of happiness. No, the text doesn't say that. So when Analayo translates the third jhana, from the Dhyāgama, the Dharmaguptaka Dhyāgama text, he can't get rid of the body. He tries, but he can't get rid of it. So the text I put in bold, with their whole being experiencing acute happiness, that is the translation of the underlying Indic kayena. And Analayo's note on that refers to the fact that in meditation, this is a vague idiom. Now, it is sort of an idiom in certain formless states, and that has to be explained. The formless meditations are a completely different thing to this, to the jhanas. Of course, it's true. The bhikkhu is experiencing with the whole body, but the word used is body. So that's Analayo on the third jhana. Oh, right. I had something on the fourth jhana. We can miss that. It's getting gone. So let me just then conclude. God. Has it been 4 hours? Why would we? I mean, it's easy to do. We come at Buddhist texts from a certain background of scholarship and work from within and without the tradition on meditation. We are accultured to see it in terms of mental concentration, despite the explicit bodily focus. The jhanas suggest that Buddhist meditation culminates in a state of bodily sentience, in which awareness is distributed through the body. It is in this state that one's cognitive conditioning is just about undone. In this state, a person's experiential world, the world of dukkha, begins to finally unravel. The jhana similes provide the conceptual background then, which help us finally understand some of the charismatic statements of the Buddha we started in the first lecture with. I started out with this statement at the beginning. This is noted, this has been known in Buddhist studies, but nobody bothers to try and explain it. It's very difficult. The Buddha apparently said, I declare the world, its arising cessation and the way thereto occurs in this very fathom-long corpse, endowed with perception of mind. Bear in mind what we have just said about the jhanas. It is a bodily suffusion, a bodily samadhi that liberation is being attained in. The cessation of the world is liberation. It occurs in the corpse. Understanding the fourth jhana as an embodied state of cognition, in which cognition has been deconstructed by turning it back to its somatic preconceptual roots, also explains why the Buddha didn't reduce liberation just to a state of mental quietude. So here is the other statement that I started off these lectures with from the Brahmajala Sutta. The body of the Tathagata remains, but its connection with being has been severed. It's the body of the Buddha which is the focus here. It's a very unusual thing to say. The commentators try and make it out that the Buddha's just talking in general about himself. If we read Buddhist texts as they are, read the jhanas as they are, this starts to make a bit more sense. Liberation is a transformation occurring in a transformed psychosomatic state. Modern scholarship on early Buddhism hasn't really explained these statements. In some cases, it hasn't even noticed them. This bottom statement is in the Brahmajala Sutta, first sutta in the entire Pali Canon. Everybody's ignored it. There has been a general tendency to ignore what is difficult and obscure, a tendency to focus on the same old passages and read them in line with tradition. So the account of the four jhanas has not been taken at its word. It has been reinterpreted through the exegesis of the Theravada tradition. the highly relevant, if not vital dialogues of the Attika and Parāyana Vaggas have been completely ignored. A quite different perspective emerges as soon as we look beyond the weighted tradition and take all the evidence seriously. This allows us to understand early Buddhist meditation as a methodless method based on a scrupulous lifestyle and attention to the simple actuality of experience. What is seen, heard,